The wind came first, howling through the crevices of Widow's Peak like a warning. Elise Harmon stood on her porch, a wool shawl wrapped tight around Boney's shoulders, watching the sky darken to purple. She'd lived alone on this ridge long enough to read the mountain's moods. Tonight it was restless. 3 distinct cracks echoed across the valley as rocks broke free from the cliff face above. She tracked their descent, expecting them to scatter randomly as they always did. But these stones tumbled with purpose, landing in a pattern at the edge of her property. Elise squinted. The failing light played tricks sometimes. She stepped off her porch, boots crunching through frost-stiffened grass. The 3 rocks had come to rest in a rough but unmistakable formation, letters. Eli. The first 3 letters of her name. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crawled up her spine. Elise backed away, nearly tripping over her own feet. She hurried inside, bolting the door behind her as if to keep out more than just the wind. The cabin's single room enveloped her in familiar shadows. A pot-bellied stove crouched in the corner, its belly glowing orange through iron grates. Photographs and wooden frames crowded the mantel above, moments frozen in time, faces smiling from decades past. Only one face appeared beside hers in every picture. Thomas. Widow's Peak hadn't always been called that. The name came after the mining accident 40 years ago that took 12 men, Thomas among them. The town below had withered soon after, families packing up and leaving when the mine closed. Everyone but Elise. She stayed, watching the valley empty until only wind lived in those abandoned homes. Morning light filtered through curtains Elise had sewn herself 20 years ago. The fabric had faded from blue to a washed-out gray, like everything else on the mountain. She made coffee on the wood stove, her movements precise from decades of repetition. The mug warmed her hands as she stepped outside to face the rocks again. They remained where they'd fallen. Eli. No natural force had arranged them so. Someone or something had spelled the beginning of her name. Elise's garden stretched behind the cabin, a stubborn rectangle of life she'd carved from the mountain's stony grip. Tomato vines climbed wooden stakes, their fruit hanging like small lanterns. A patch of carrots, their feathery tops dancing in the breeze. Wild roses she transplanted from the valley climbed the western wall, defiant splashes of pink against weathered wood. Her tools hung on nails driven into the cabin's exterior, a rusted trowel, pruning shears with handles worn smooth, a hoe with a cracked handle she'd mended with wire. Each implement told the story of her refusal to surrender to solitude or the mountain's harsh demands. That evening, Elise pulled a wooden chest from beneath her bed. She hadn't opened it in years. The hinges protested as she lifted the lid, releasing the scent of cedar and memories. Thomas's mining helmet lay atop folded clothes, its lamp long dead. She lifted it carefully, revealing stacks of letters bound with faded ribbon, photographs, and a small velvet pouch. She didn't mean to sort through everything, just to touch these pieces of her past, remind herself they were real. But as she shifted a bundle of photographs, something slipped free, an envelope she didn't recognize, yellowed with age. Her name was written across it in Thomas's slanting script. Elise's heart quickened. How had she missed this? Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal, careful not to tear the brittle paper. Inside was a single page, dated 2 days before the accident. My dearest Elise, it began. If you're reading this, I've either found the courage to tell you everything or I'm gone and you found it yourself. Meet me at our place in the Eastern Tunnel. I've left something there for you, something I should have given you long ago. All my love, Thomas. She read it 3 times, her vision blurring. Their place, a small cavern they'd discovered during the early days, when Thomas would sneak her into the mine after hours. They'd carved their initials into the rock wall, made plans for a future that never came. Elise folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. 40 years too late. The mine had been sealed after the accident, deemed too dangerous. Whatever Thomas had left there was buried with him and the others. Sleep eluded her that night. Wind rattled the window panes as she stared at the ceiling, the letter's words echoing in her mind. By dawn, she'd made her decision. The mining site lay 3 miles down the mountain, a scar in the earth partially reclaimed by nature. Warning signs hung from a chain-link fence, their red letters faded but still legible. Danger. No entry. Unstable ground. Elise followed the fence until she found what she was looking for, a section where the earth had eroded beneath, leaving a gap just large enough to squeeze through. She'd brought Thomas's helmet, its lamp replaced with a modern flashlight she'd wired in. The weight of it felt right on her head, as if she carried a piece of him. The main entrance had been sealed with concrete decades ago, but miners always knew the back ways in. Thomas had shown her once, a narrow fissure in the rock face that led to the lower tunnels. It took her an hour of searching to find it, half hidden by scrub brush and fallen rocks. The passage was tighter than she remembered. Elise turned sideways, inching through the narrow opening, feeling the mountain press against her chest. For a moment, panic flared, the weight of earth above, the thought of being trapped. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each exhale until the passage widened and she could stand upright. The beam from her helmet cut through absolute darkness. Dust motes danced in the light, undisturbed for decades until her breath sent them swirling. The air smelled of damp stone and something metallic, the iron in the rocks, the remnants of, or that had drawn men into the earth. Elise oriented herself, trying to remember the path Thomas had shown her. The eastern tunnel would be to her right, following the seam of coal that had been the mine's primary focus. Her footsteps echoed as she walked, the only sound besides the occasional drip of water from unseen crevices. The tunnel forked, and she hesitated. Left or right? A memory surfaced, Thomas pointing to a support beam with a knot in the wood shaped like a heart. Nature's signpost, he'd called it. She swept her light across the timbers until she found it, the heart-shaped knot barely visible beneath a film of dust. Right tunnel. The passage narrowed again, the ceiling dropping so low she had to stoop. Water had seeped through in places, leaving mineral deposits that gleamed like tears in her light. The air grew colder as she descended deeper. She almost missed it, the small opening in the wall where the tunnel widened into a natural cavern. Their place. Elise ducked through, her light illuminating a space no larger than her cabin's main room. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles, the result of centuries of patient water. And there, on the far wall, were their initials, TH+EM, enclosed in a rough heart. Thomas had carved them with his pocket knife while she held a lantern, both of them laughing at their teenage-like behavior despite being in their 20s. Beneath the carving was a small natural shelf in the rock. Elise's light caught something that didn't belong, a metal box, about the size of a book, coated with dust and mineral deposits. Her hand shook as she reached for it. The lid was sealed with the same minerals, requiring her to pry it open with her pocket knife. Inside lay a leather-bound journal and a small wooden box. The journal's pages had yellowed but remained intact, protected from the worst of the mine's dampness. She opened to the first page, recognizing Thomas's handwriting immediately. For Elise, who deserves more than silence. She sank to the floor of the cavern, her back against the cool stone, and began to read. The journal contained everything Thomas had never said aloud, his fears about the mine's safety, his dreams of leaving to start a business in the city, his regret at not having children because he worried about raising them in a mining town. Page after page of thoughts he'd kept from her, believing he was protecting her, or perhaps himself. I watch her in the garden, one entry read, coaxing life from this stubborn ground, and I wonder if she knows how much she resembles those wildflowers she transplants, beautiful and resilient in a place that tries to break everything. I haven't told her about the cracks in the main support beams. Haven't told her how the foreman ignores our reports. Haven't told her I've applied for jobs in Denver. I keep thinking there will be time for truth later, when things are settled. But nothing ever settles here except dust. The final entry was dated the day before the accident. Bought Elise's ring today. Not the engagement ring, she deserves better than the simple band I could afford then. This is the ring I've saved 3 years for, with the blue stone that matches her eyes. I'll take her to our place tomorrow after my shift and give it to her there, where I first knew I loved her. Then I'll tell her everything about the job offer in Denver, about starting fresh. It's time for truth between us. Elise closed the journal, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. The small wooden box still sat in her lap. She opened it with unsteady fingers to find a silver ring with a single blue topaz. The stone caught her helmet's light, throwing fractured blue across the cavern walls. She slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if Thomas had measured while she slept. Perhaps he had. The walk back to the surface passed in a daze. Elise emerged from the mountain as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the abandoned mining yard. She stood for a long time, looking at the weathered buildings, the rusted equipment, the mountain that had taken Thomas and given her this final message decades too late. That night, a storm rolled across Widow's Peak. Lightning split the sky as Elise sat by her window, Thomas's journal open on her lap, the ring catching lamplight on her finger. She read every word again, hearing his voice in each line. The man she'd married and the man she'd never fully known, existing together on these pages. Thunder shook the cabin's foundations. Rain lashed against the windows like thrown gravel. Elise thought of the 3 rocks that had fallen, spelling the first 3 letters of her name. Was it Thomas, somehow reaching across time? Or merely the mountain, shrugging stones from its shoulders with indifferent force? Morning broke clear and cold after the storm. Elise walked to where the 3 rocks had fallen. The rain had washed them clean, their surfaces gleaming dully in the sunlight. Eli. The beginning of a name, the start of a message. She stood at the edge of her property, looking down at the valley where empty buildings huddled like mourners around the sealed mine entrance. For 40 years, she'd lived in the shadow of what happened there. For 40 years, she'd tended her garden, watched seasons change, and slept alone in a bed meant for 2. The question came unbidden. Why had she stayed? Out of loyalty to Thomas's memory? Fear of the unknown beyond the mountain? Or something deeper, a sense that leaving meant admitting it was truly over? The ring felt heavy on her finger as she walked back to her cabin. Inside, she moved with new purpose, gathering supplies, her trowel, seeds saved from summer flowers, a watering can. She returned to the 3 rocks and knelt in the earth beside them. The ground was hard, resistant to her trowel at first. Elise worked methodically, turning soil, breaking clods between her fingers. She dug 4 small holes beyond the rocks, then reached into her pocket for the seeds, columbine, Thomas's favorite, their blue matching the stone in her ring. As she worked, she spoke aloud for the first time in days. You should have told me, Thomas. We could have faced it together. Her voice sounded strange in the open air, rough from disuse. But I kept my own silences too. She planted the seeds, one by one, tamping soil gently over each. When the 4th was covered, she sat back on her heels and looked at what she'd created. The 3 rocks and 4 plantings formed 7 points. Elise. Her complete name written in stone and potential blooms. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Elise closed her eyes, feeling it move through her hair, across her face. For a moment, it seemed to carry a familiar scent, the soap Thomas had used, the oil that always clung to his clothes. I stayed because I was afraid, she said to the wind, to the mountain, to the memory of the man she'd loved. Afraid that leaving meant losing the last pieces of you. But you're not in this place, are you? You're in me, in what I choose to do with the life that continued. That evening, Elise sat at her small table with paper and pen. She wrote slowly, deliberately, putting down the words she'd kept inside for 40 years. When she finished, she folded the pages and placed them in Thomas's journal. Future words keeping company with past ones. The next morning, she watered the seeds she'd planted, though no green yet showed above the soil. It would take time, patience. She had both in abundance. 1 week later, Elise carried a small suitcase to her truck. The cabin was locked, but not emptied. She would return. This mountain was in her bones now, impossible to leave entirely. But first, she would drive to Denver, find the company Thomas had applied to all those years ago. Not for a job, but for answers. To walk the streets he might have walked with her in that other, unlived life. As she started the engine, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The 3 rocks remained where they'd fallen, with tiny green shoots now visible in the 4 holes she dug. Elise. Her name written in stone and life. The truck rumbled down the winding road that led away from Widow's Peak. Elise drove slowly, watching the mountain recede in her mirror until it was just a dark shape against the sky. Not goodbye, she thought. Just a different kind of hello. Miles later, she pulled over at a scenic overlook. The valley spread below her, and beyond it, the endless horizon. She opened Thomas's journal to the last page, where she'd written her own entry. The mountain gives and takes in equal measure. It took you and gave me solitude. It took our future and gave me 40 years of quiet strength. Today it gave me your words, and I'm giving myself permission to live the life we might have shared. Not in place, but in spirit. With love that doesn't end, even when it changes form. Elise closed the journal and placed it on the passenger seat beside her. She twisted the blue topaz ring on her finger once, then put both hands on the steering wheel. The road ahead curved toward the horizon, its destination invisible but real. Like grief, like love, like the journey from what was lost to what might still be found. She drove on, leaving Widow's Peak behind but carrying its lessons within her. The mountain would wait. It was good at waiting. And when she returned, perhaps those columbine seeds would have bloomed, her name spelled in blue flowers beside the 3 fallen rocks. A message completed. A life continuing. The truck rounded a bend, and the mountain disappeared from view. Elise smiled. For the first time in 40 years, she was heading towards something, not just living within the shadow of what had been lost. The ring caught sunlight as she turned the wheel, throwing fractured blue across the dashboard, like hope, breaking into colors only visible when light strikes at just the right angle.